The starship's conference room hummed with nervous energy as Dr. Adrian Hale fumbled with his universal translator earpiece. His hands trembled slightly, betraying the calm demeanor he tried to project. Through the viewport, the alien capital of Illustra sprawled beneath them crystalline spires that caught and refracted the binary sunset into impossible colors. "Remember, Adrian," Ambassador Sarah Mitchell said, adjusting her formal diplomatic robes. "This is just a preliminary tech check. You're here to ensure the translation systems work properly. Nothing more." Adrian nodded, wiping his sweaty palms on his pants. At 32, he was considered brilliant in xenolinguistics, but his tendency to trip over his own feet in high-pressure situations had earned him a reputation as endearingly clumsy. He'd spent 3 years developing the neural linguistic interface that made real-time translation between humans and the Avari possible. But this would be his first time using it in actual diplomatic conditions. "The Avari take language very seriously," Captain James Reeves added, his weathered face stern. "Every word carries weight in their culture. Some phrases are legally binding just by being spoken." "I've studied their linguistic protocols extensively," Adrian assured him, though his voice cracked slightly. "The translator has fail-safes built in to prevent any cultural misunderstandings." The doors to the conference room slid open with a soft hiss, and the human delegation stood as their Avari counterparts entered. Adrian's breath caught in his throat. He'd seen images of the Avari before, humanoid in shape but taller, with skin that seemed to shimmer like liquid mercury, and eyes that held flecks of starlight. But nothing had prepared him for Queen Kailira herself. She moved with a grace that defied physics, her flowing robes seeming to float rather than drape. Her silver-white hair was woven with threads of light, and when her violet eyes met his across the room, Adrian felt his knees go weak. She was beautiful in an otherworldly way that made his chest tight. Behind her, Lord Theric followed a mountain of muscle and barely concealed hostility. Where the Queen embodied elegance, Theric radiated violence. His hand rested on the hilt of a ceremonial blade that looked anything but ceremonial. "Your Majesty," Ambassador Mitchell began, bowing deeply. "We are honored by your presence." Adrian activated his translator, feeling the familiar tingle as the neural interface synced with his brain. The Queen's response flowed through the device, rendering her melodious Avari speech into English. "The honor is mutual, Ambassador Mitchell. We welcome this opportunity to forge understanding between our peoples." The formal greetings continued, and Adrian found himself relaxing slightly. The translator was working perfectly, capturing not just words, but nuances of meaning. He made minor adjustments on his tablet, fine-tuning the cultural context algorithms. Then disaster struck. As the Queen turned her attention to him, Adrian felt a sudden spike of static through his earpiece. The neural interface flickered, sending confusing signals through his brain. He opened his mouth to offer the formal greeting he'd practiced 100 times. What came out was not what he intended. "My wife," he said clearly in perfect Avari. "It is my joy to stand before you." The room froze. The temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees. Every Avari in the room stared at Adrian with expressions ranging from shock to outrage. Lord Theric's hand tightened on his blade. Adrian's mind raced. What had he just said? The translator was malfunctioning, but he couldn't understand what had gone wrong. He tried to speak again, to clarify, but Ambassador Mitchell grabbed his arm in a vice grip. Queen Kailira's expression remained unreadable for a long moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, she smiled a small, enigmatic curve of her lips. "The human speaks the binding words," she said in English, bypassing the need for translation. "By our law, his declaration stands." "Your Majesty," Lord Theric stepped forward, his voice a growl. "Surely you cannot accept such an insult. This human dares to claim you as his wife. The binding words are sacred." "And they have been spoken," Kailira replied calmly. Would you have me break our most fundamental law, Lord Theric? The one that states all words spoken in formal acknowledgement are truth. Adrian's tablet finally displayed the translation error. Where he should have said, Your Majesty, the malfunctioning translator had substituted my wife, a phrase that, in Avari culture, constituted a legally binding marriage proposal when spoken in formal settings. There's been a mistake, Adrian blurted out. The translator malfunctioned. You didn't mean to speak the words, Kalira asked, tilting her head. Yet you spoke them. In our culture, intent follows speech, not the reverse. Captain Reeves stepped forward. Your Majesty, surely you understand this was a technical error. Dr. Hale meant no disrespect. Disrespect, Lord Theric snarled. He has either insulted our queen beyond measure or bound himself to her in marriage. There is no middle ground in Avari law. The queen raised a hand, silencing Theric. She studied Adrian with those unsettling violet eyes, and he felt like she was looking straight through him. Tell me, Dr. Hale, she said slowly, do you understand what you have done? Adrian swallowed hard. I understand that I accidentally spoke words that your culture considers a marriage proposal. Not a proposal, she corrected. A declaration. In speaking the binding words, you have already claimed me as your wife. The only question now is whether I accept or reject this claim. And if you reject it, Ambassador Mitchell asked carefully. Lord Theric smiled coldly. Then the human has committed the gravest insult possible against the crown. The penalty is death. Adrian felt the blood drain from his face. His stupid translator had literally put his life on the line. He looked desperately at the queen, trying to read her alien features. However, Kalira continued, I find myself curious about this human who speaks the binding words so boldly, even if by accident. She moved closer to Adrian, and he caught a scent like ozone and flowers. Tell me, Dr. Hale, what do you know of our customs regarding marriage? Adrian's academic training kicked in, overriding his panic. I know that marriage among the Avari is considered a meeting of minds as much as hearts, that partners are expected to challenge each other intellectually and support each other's growth, that the bond, once made, is dissolved only by death. Interesting, the queen murmured. And what do you know of me? Adrian hesitated, then decided honesty was his best option. I know you've ruled for 6 years since your father's death, that you've pushed for reforms that would open Avari society to greater contact with other species, that the conservative faction, led by, he glanced at Theric, certain nobles, opposes these reforms. Theric's expression darkened further, but Kalira laughed a sound like silver bells. You've done your research. Tell me, do you find me beautiful? The question caught Adrian completely off guard. He felt heat rise to his face. Yes. You're the most beautiful being I've ever seen. Your Majesty, Theric interrupted. This farce has gone on long enough. Either reject his claim and let me execute him for his insult, or accept it, Kalira finished. She turned back to Adrian. You spoke the binding words in front of witnesses. By our law, if I accept, you become my husband. You would be required to remain on Elistra, learn our ways, and fulfill all the duties of a royal consort. Do you understand? Adrian's mind whirled. This was insane. He'd come here to check translation software, not get married to alien royalty. But the alternative was execution, and something in the Queen's eyes suggested she was offering him more than just survival. I understand, he said quietly. Kalira smiled again. Then I accept your claim. Adrian Hale, by the laws of our people, you are now my husband. The room erupted. Lord Theric roared in outrage, his blade half drawn before other guards restrained him. The human delegation stood in stunned silence. Adrian felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. "Your Majesty," Theric seethed. "This is unprecedented. A human as royal consort. The noble houses will never accept this." "They will accept it because the law demands it," Kalira replied coolly. "Unless you're suggesting we abandon the binding words, the very foundation of our legal system." Theric's jaw clenched. Adrian realized the Queen had neatly trapped her opposition to reject the marriage, would mean undermining the linguistic laws that gave the nobility much of their power. "This won't stand," Theric growled. "The human will never survive the trials of bonding." Adrian's translator helpfully provided context to ancient rituals that new royal consorts underwent to prove their worthiness. The mortality rate was historically high. "That remains to be seen," Kalira said. She turned to Ambassador Mitchell. "I regret that this complicates our negotiations, but I trust we can proceed. Your linguist will remain here as my husband. I assume you have no objections." Mitchell looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. "Your Majesty, this is highly irregular. I need to consult with my superiors." "Of course," Kalira agreed. "In the meantime, Adrian will be given quarters in the palace. Captain Arvin will see to his safety." A younger Avari warrior stepped forward, tall and lean where Theric was bulky, with intelligent eyes that assessed Adrian critically. "Your safety is now my responsibility," Arvin said in accented English. "Try not to make it difficult." As the formal meeting dissolved into chaos, Adrian found himself swept along by events beyond his control. His tablet buzzed with an incoming message from his sister Mira, back on Earth. "Heard you were doing the diploma thing today. Try not to accidentally start a war." Adrian laughed hysterically. If only she knew he'd done something potentially worse. He'd accidentally married into it. Over the next hours, Adrian was shuttled through a blur of palace corridors, each more magnificent than the last. Crystal formations grew from the walls, pulsing with bioluminescent light. Courtiers stared at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to hostility. "They think you're either very brave or very stupid," Captain Arvin commented, as he led Adrian to his new quarters. "Which do you think?" Adrian asked. Arvin considered. "Both, probably. No human has ever held a position in our court, let alone as consort to the Queen." "Why did she accept?" Adrian asked. "She could have just had me executed." "The Queen's motivations are her own," Arvin replied diplomatically. But Adrian caught something in his tone, worry, perhaps even fear. The quarters they arrived at were lavish beyond anything Adrian had experienced. The main chamber was larger than his entire apartment on Earth, with walls of programmable crystal that could become transparent or opaque at will. A bed that looked more like a small lake of responsive fabric dominated one area. "Your belongings will be brought from your ship," Arvin said. "Tomorrow, you'll begin learning our customs. The trials of bonding must be completed within one lunar cycle." "What exactly do these trials involve?" Adrian asked nervously. Arvin's expression was grim. "Tests of combat, wisdom, and worthiness. Many Avari nobles have died attempting them. For a human." He shook his head. "I'll be honest, Dr. Hale. Your chances of survival are slim. But not zero." "Not zero," Arvin agreed. "The Queen seems to think you might surprise us. I hope she's right. I'd hate to lose another consort to Theric's schemes." Adrian's blood chilled. "Another—" Arvin caught himself. "I've said too much. Rest now. Tomorrow, your new life begins." As the door sealed behind Arvin, Adrian sank onto the alien bed, his mind racing. What had that comment about another consort meant? And why did he get the feeling that his accidental proposal had dropped him into the middle of a much larger and more dangerous game? His tablet chimed. A message from the Queen appeared on the screen. "My accidental husband. We must talk privately. Palace politics are more dangerous than you know. Trust no one except Captain Arvin. Your life depends on understanding the game you've been pulled into. I will send for you tonight. Be ready." K. Adrian stared at the message. Then, at the alien city stretching beyond his window. Somewhere out there, Lord Theric was undoubtedly plotting his death. The Queen had her own agenda, and he was trapped in the middle, a pawn who'd accidentally declared himself king. But as terrifying as it all was, Adrian felt a spark of something else: curiosity. The Queen had accepted his proposal for a reason. The nobility feared change, and somehow, a clumsy linguist from Earth had become the catalyst for something larger. His translator lay on the bedside table, innocent-looking, despite having nearly gotten him killed. Adrian picked it up, running diagnostic protocols. The malfunction was subtle, a cascade error in the contextual database that had swapped formal titles with intimate relations. As he worked, Adrian made a decision. If he was going to survive this, he needed to understand not just the Avari language, but their entire society. Every word, every custom, every political undercurrent. The binary suns were setting, casting Illustra in purple twilight. Somewhere in this crystal palace, his accidental wife was preparing for a clandestine meeting. Lord Theric was sharpening his knives, both literal and metaphorical. And Adrian Hale, who'd always been more comfortable with books than people, was about to play the most dangerous game of his life. He thought about Mira's joke about not starting a war. Instead, he'd done something potentially worse. He'd inserted himself into the heart of an alien empire's power struggle. All because of a glitch in translation. But as Adrian watched the alien stars emerge in the darkening sky, he felt an unexpected thrill. For the first time in his academic life, he wasn't just studying language and culture from a safe distance. He was living it, breathing it, bound to it by chains of words he'd never meant to speak. The game was deadly, the stakes impossibly high, and his chances of survival slim. But Adrian had spent his whole life preparing for this moment without knowing it. Every language learned, every cultural nuance studied, every late night spent unraveling the mysteries of communication, it had all led here. Tomorrow, the trials would begin. Tonight, he would learn from the Queen what web he'd fallen into. And somehow, the boy who'd always been too clumsy for his own good would have to become someone worthy of standing beside alien royalty. Adrian smiled grimly at his reflection in the crystal wall. He might die in the attempt, but at least he'd finally found a linguistic puzzle worth solving: how to translate not just words, but survival itself in a world where every syllable could seal your fate. The stars of Illustra looked nothing like Earth's constellations, but as Adrian waited for the Queen's summons, he found their alien beauty oddly comforting. He was far from home, accidentally married, and probably marked for death. But for the first time in his life, Adrian Hale felt truly alive. The knock came at midnight, soft but unmistakable. Adrian had been pacing his quarters for hours, unable to sleep despite the bed's alien comfort. When he opened the door, he found not Captain Arvin but a figure wrapped in dark robes. "Follow," the figure whispered in accented English. "The Queen awaits." Adrian hesitated for a moment, remembering Kaelira's warning to trust no one except Arvin. But something in the messenger's bearing, a subtle deference that couldn't be faked, convinced him. He grabbed his translator and followed. The palace at night was a different creature entirely. The bioluminescent crystals had dimmed to a soft glow, casting long shadows through corridors that seemed to shift and change. Adrian's guide led him through passages he was certain hadn't existed during his earlier tour, until they arrived at a door marked with symbols his translator couldn't parse. "Enter," the guide said, then vanished back into the shadows. Adrian pushed through the door and found himself in a circular chamber, unlike anything he'd seen in the palace. The walls were covered in ancient texts that seemed to writhe and shift as he looked at them. At the center sat Queen Kaelira, but she looked nothing like the regal figure from the afternoon's meeting. Her formal robes had been replaced by simple clothing that wouldn't have looked out of place on a human researcher. Her hair hung loose, and the threads of light that had been woven through it were gone. She looked younger, more vulnerable, and somehow even more beautiful. "Adrian," she said, gesturing to a seat across from her. "Thank you for coming. We have much to discuss and little time." "Your Majesty." "Kylara," she interrupted. "In this room, I am just Kylara, and you are my husband, whether either of us intended it or not." Adrian sat, acutely aware of the intimacy of the setting. "Why did you accept my proposal? You could have had me executed." Kylara smiled sadly. "Could I think, Adrian? You're a linguist. You understand the power of words in society. What would have happened if I had rejected the binding words?" Adrian's mind raced through the implications. "It would have set a precedent. If the Queen can reject binding words based on intent rather than speech, the entire foundation of our legal system crumbles," Kylara finished. "Lord Theric knew this. I believe he was counting on it." "You think the translator malfunction wasn't an accident?" "Very little happens by accident in this palace," Kylara said. She waved her hand, and the symbols on the walls rearranged themselves into images, scenes from Avari history. "Let me tell you about my father's death." The images showed a tall Avari man who shared Kylara's violet eyes. King Aldrich, Adrian realized. 2 years ago, my father was challenged to a blood duel of truth by Lord Theric's cousin, Lord Varen. The challenge involved a complex point of legal interpretation, whether certain ancient texts supported expansion of trade rights with other species. Adrian watched as the images played out the duel. King Aldrich was clearly the superior warrior. But something went wrong. At a crucial moment, he hesitated, confused, and Varen's blade found his heart. "My father was killed by a trick of language," Kylara said bitterly. "During the duel, Varen used an archaic form of a common word, one that sounds identical to modern Avari, but means the opposite. My father's moment of confusion trying to parse the meaning was all Varen needed." "That's why you're pushing for reform," Adrian said, understanding dawning. "You want to change the system that allowed your father's murder. The nobility clings to these linguistic tricks like weapons," Kylara confirmed. "They use obscure dialects and dead languages to maintain power, to twist justice to their will. I've been trying to modernize our legal system, to make it accessible to all Avari, not just those who can afford years of classical education. And Theric opposes this." "Violently," Kylara's expression hardened. "He was Varen's mentor. After my father's death and Varen's mysterious disappearance, Theric became the de facto leader of the conservative faction. He's been waiting for an opportunity to challenge me, but I've been careful to give him no legal opening. Until today," Adrian said, "when I accidentally gave him the perfect excuse." "Except you didn't," Kylara said, and her smile held a hint of triumph. "By accepting your proposal, I've done something unprecedented, brought an outsider into the heart of our government. Someone who understands language, but isn't bound by our classical traditions. Someone who might see solutions we've been too hidebound to consider." Adrian felt a chill. "You're using me." "Yes," Kylara said simply, "but I'm also saving your life. And if you're as intelligent as your academic record suggests, you might just save mine in return." She gestured, and the images on the walls changed to show complex diagrams, political alliances, power structures, ancient laws. "The trials of bonding were instituted 3,000 years ago," she explained. "Originally, they were meant to ensure royal consorts could defend the realm. Over time, they've become a tool for elimination. The trials are overseen by the Council of Lords, which Theric effectively controls." "So I'm going to die anyway," Adrian said flatly. "Not necessarily." Kylara leaned forward, her violet eyes intense. "The trials test combat, wisdom, and worthiness. Combat seems hopeless for a human, But the tests are bound by ancient rules. They must be fair within their own framework. And the wisdom trial is about language, Adrian finished. That's why you really accepted me. You think I can beat them at their own game. I think you're our best hope, Kalira admitted. Theric will try to kill you. Yes. But if you survive the trials when you survive them, you'll have a voice in council. A voice that can speak for reform without the baggage of centuries of tradition. Adrian stood and paced to the wall, studying the shifting symbols. His whole life had been about understanding how language shaped reality. Now he was being asked to reshape an entire civilization's reality through language. What aren't you telling me? He asked. Captain Arvin mentioned another consort. Kalira's face closed off. That's not relevant. It is, if I'm going to trust you. Adrian interrupted, then caught himself. Sorry, I shouldn't. No, Kalira said softly. You're right. If I'm asking you to risk your life, you deserve the truth. She stood and moved to join him at the wall. This close. Adrian could see the weight she carried in the line of her shoulders. I was bonded once before, she said quietly. His name was Joran, a minor noble who shared my vision for reform. We grew up together, fell in love despite the political impossibility of it. When I became queen, I chose him as consort. Adrian heard the pain in her voice. Theric killed him. Not directly. Joran made it through the combat trial barely. But during the wisdom trial, Theric's people fed him false information. They made him believe I was in danger, that answering incorrectly would save my life. He chose wrong, and the penalty was death. I'm sorry, Adrian said, meaning it. I watched the man I loved die for a lie, Kalira said. I swore I would never take another consort, never give Theric another weapon to use against me. But then you spoke those words, and I saw an opportunity. To use an expendable human to strike back. Kalira turned to face him fully. No, to find someone Theric would underestimate. Someone with skills he couldn't anticipate. Someone who might actually win. Adrian searched her face. And if I don't, if I die like Joran, then I'll mourn another good man lost to Theric's ambition, she said. But if you succeed, Adrian, if you succeed, we could change everything. No more linguistic tricks deciding justice. No more knowledge hoarded by the elite. A true partnership between our species based on understanding, not exploitation. The weight of it all pressed down on Adrian. This morning, he'd been a simple linguist. Now he was being asked to be a revolutionary. I need to think, he said. Of course. But while you think, let me show you something else. Kalira touched a specific symbol on the wall, and a hidden panel opened. Inside was a small device that looked like a more advanced version of his translator. This was my father's project. He was working with human scientists to develop translation technology that could parse not just words, but intent, context, even deception. Adrian examined the device with professional interest. This is incredible. The neural mapping alone is years ahead of anything we have. He believed that perfect communication could end conflicts before they began, Kalira said. Theric had him killed before he could complete it, but the research exists, hidden in the palace archives. With your expertise, we could finish it, Adrian breathed. A translator that could expose lies, reveal true intentions, make deception through language impossible. It would revolutionize not just a very society, but potentially all interspecies relations. Now you understand, Kalira said. This is bigger than just my throne or your survival. This is about the future of how civilizations communicate. Adrian felt pieces clicking into place. That's why my translator malfunctioned. Someone didn't want the human linguistic expert anywhere near this project. Most likely, which means Theric has allies in your delegation as well as mine. The implications were staggering. Adrian thought of Ambassador Mitchell, Captain Reeves, his own team. Who could be trusted? There's something else, Kalira said. She moved to another section of the wall, revealing a timeline. The trials of bonding must be completed within one lunar cycle 28 days. But there's an older law, one Theric might not know I've discovered. If a consort can prove immediate value to the realm, the trials can be delayed. How do I prove immediate value? By solving the translation crisis with the Nexari Trade Confederation. They're arriving in 3 days for crucial negotiations. But our current translators can't handle their quantum linguistic structure. If you could crack their language. Adrian's academic excitement sparked. The Nexari were legendary for their incomprehensible communication system that seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously. I'd need access to everything you have on them, he said. Every recording, every failed translation attempt, every cultural note. Done, Kalira smiled, and it transformed her face. I knew I chose well. You didn't choose me, Adrian reminded her. It was an accident. Was it? She moved closer, and Adrian's heart rate spiked. I could have had you executed, could have found a legal loophole, could have done a dozen things. But when I looked at you in that conference room flustered, terrified, but still trying to find a solution, I saw something I hadn't seen since Joran. Hope. Adrian didn't know how to respond to that. The queen of an alien empire was placing her hope in him, a man who'd once tripped over his own feet while receiving his doctorate. I should go, he said awkwardly. If I'm going to solve Nexari in 3 days, I need to start now. Adrian! Kalira caught his arm as he turned to leave. Her touch sent electricity through him. Be careful. Theric will move against you soon. Trust Arvin, trust me, but no one else. And remember, in Avari society, words are weapons. Use them wisely. Adrian nodded, overwhelmed by everything he'd learned. As he reached the door, one more question occurred to him. Kalira, what happens if we fall in love? She looked startled, then sad. Then Theric gains his greatest weapon against us both. Love makes us vulnerable, clouds judgment, creates weakness he can exploit. But your parents loved each other. You loved Joran. And look how that ended. Her voice was barely a whisper. I can't afford to love again, Adrian, and neither can you. We must be partners, allies, even friends. But nothing more. Adrian left the chamber, with his mind churning. The palace corridors seemed even more labyrinthine on the return journey. But he found his way back to his quarters without incident. Once inside, he immediately began pulling up everything in the palace database about the Nexari. Their language was indeed a nightmare, words that seemed to exist in multiple meanings, simultaneously until observed. Grammar that followed quantum probability rather than linear rules. Adrian lost himself in the puzzle, using it to avoid thinking about violet eyes and the touch of an alien queen's hand. Hours passed. The binary suns began to rise, casting new light through his windows. Adrian had filled dozens of holoscreens with notes, patterns, theoretical frameworks. The Nexari language wasn't just complex, it was a fundamentally different way of conceptualizing reality. A chime announced breakfast's arrival, along with Captain Arvin. You look terrible, Arvin observed, setting down a tray of Avari foods Adrian didn't recognize. Thanks. I've been working on the Nexari problem. Arvin's eyes sharpened. The Queen told you about that. Interesting. Most consorts aren't brought into state matters until after the trials. Most consorts probably aren't accidental linguists with a death sentence hanging over their heads. True, Arvin studied him. You met with her last night. It wasn't a question. Adrian nodded cautiously. Good. You'll need her guidance to survive what's coming. Lord Theric has called an emergency council session for this afternoon. He's going to formally protest your marriage and demand immediate trials. Can he do that? He can try. The Queen will counter with the Nexari situation, buying time. But Adrian... Arvin's expression was serious. Theric has supporters even among the Queen's Guard. Watch everything: your food, your quarters, You're back. The trials aren't the only way to eliminate an unwanted consort. Adrian felt the walls closing in. Why are you helping me, really? Arvin was quiet for a moment. I served King Aldrich. I was there when he died. Saw the trick that killed him. I failed to protect him. Failed to protect Joran. I won't fail again. I'm not a warrior, Adrian said. I'm just a scientist who talks to computers about grammar. Perhaps that's exactly what we need. Arvin moved to the window, looking out at the Crystal City. Our civilization has been trapped by our own language for millennia. We've made words into chains, tradition into law, until we can barely breathe without consulting ancient texts. The Queen sees a way forward, but she needs allies who think differently. And you think I can be that ally? I think you already are. Arvin turned back to him. Whether you meant to be or not, now, eat something and get cleaned up. Your first official appearance as royal consort is in 3 hours, and Theric will be looking for any excuse to challenge your worthiness. As Arvin left, Adrian forced himself to eat the alien food despite his churning stomach. He was playing a game whose rules he barely understood, with stakes higher than he'd imagined. But as he looked at his work on the Nexari language, he felt a familiar thrill. This was what he did: found patterns in chaos, built bridges between incomprehensible systems. He just had to apply those skills to staying alive. His tablet chimed with a message from Mira. Heard something weird on the news about you and alien royalty. Please tell me the reporters got it wrong. Adrian laughed despite everything. How could he explain that he'd accidentally married a queen, uncovered a conspiracy, and become the unlikely hope for an entire civilization's reform? He started to type a response, then stopped. If Theric had allies in the human delegation, communications might be monitored. Instead, he sent back, "It's complicated. I'll explain when I can. Working on something big." Another message appeared. This one from Queen Kalira. Council in 2 hours. Remember, words are weapons, but silence can be armor. Let Theric reveal his strategy before you speak. And Adrian, you're stronger than you know. Adrian closed his eyes, centered himself, and returned to the Nexari puzzle. Somewhere in these quantum linguistic patterns was the key to buying time, to proving his worth, to surviving long enough to make a difference. The game was just beginning, and Adrian Hale, accidental husband, reluctant revolutionary, and perpetual underdog, was determined to change the rules. The council chamber of Illustra was designed to intimidate. Crystalline columns stretched impossibly high, their surfaces reflecting and refracting light in ways that made Adrian dizzy. The lords and ladies of the Avari nobility sat in tiered rows that seemed to float in midair, their faces masks of cold judgment. Adrian stood beside Kalira's throne, acutely aware of every eye upon him. He wore the ceremonial robes Arvin had provided, deep blue fabric that shifted color with movement, marked with symbols declaring his status as royal consort. The weight of it felt suffocating. "This is an abomination!" Lord Theric's voice rang out before the formal proceedings had even begun. He stood in the center of the chamber, his massive frame radiating barely controlled fury. A human, contaminating our sacred bonds with his alien presence. Murmurs rippled through the assembled nobles. Adrian caught fragments of their words: insult, precedent, weakness. He forced himself to remain still, remembering Kalira's advice about silence being armor. "Lord Theric," Kalira said, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "You speak out of turn. The council has been called to session, not to indulge your theatrics." Theatrics. Theric whirled to face her. "Your Majesty makes a mockery of our traditions and calls my objection theatrical. This creature spoke the binding words through deception. Through accident," Kalira corrected, "which the law does not distinguish from intent, as you well know, having used that same principle to your advantage many times. Adrian noticed how several nobles shifted uncomfortably at that reminder. How many of them had benefited from linguistic technicalities in the past. The law was never meant to apply to lesser species, Theric argued. Humans lack the cognitive complexity to truly understand the binding words. This marriage is invalid by its very nature. Adrian felt heat rise to his face at being called a lesser species, but he held his tongue. Not yet. Let Theric reveal more. Interesting, Kalira said mildly. Are you suggesting we amend our fundamental laws based on species that would set quite a precedent? Lord Theric, perhaps next we should revisit property rights for the Zalari minorities in your holdings. Theric's face darkened. The Zalari were a subspecies of Avari who had been systematically disenfranchised for centuries. Adrian filed that information away, another crack in the supposed unity of Avari society. The human must face the trials immediately, Theric declared, changing tactics. Let the ancient test determine his worthiness, as is tradition. The trials will proceed according to law, Kalira agreed, within one lunar cycle, as prescribed, unless, of course, the consort demonstrates immediate value to the realm. What possible value could a human? The Nexari arrive in 2 days. Kalira interrupted smoothly. Their trade agreement could revolutionize our economy, if we can communicate with them. Our best linguists have failed for years. My consort has been working on the problem. All eyes turned to Adrian. This was his cue. Your Majesty, Adrian said, his voice steadier than he felt. Lords and ladies of the council, I believe I've made a breakthrough. He activated his holographic display, filling the chamber with swirling patterns of Nexari script. Several nobles leaned forward despite themselves. The Nexari language operates on quantum principles, Adrian explained. Each word exists in multiple states until the moment of communication. Previous translation attempts failed because they tried to force linear meaning onto a non-linear system. He manipulated the display, showing how certain symbols shifted and changed. But if we approach it like a probability cloud, rather than fixed definitions, patterns emerge. The key is to embrace ambiguity, not resolve it. Nonsense, Lord Theric scoffed. You're speaking in circles, human. Am I? Adrian turned to face him directly for the first time. Then, perhaps you'd like to explain why the Nexari's last message to us translates simultaneously as, "We eagerly await trade," and "We declare economic war." Shocked murmurs filled the chamber. The Nexari communication crisis had been plaguing them for months. Using my probability-based translation matrix, Adrian continued, I can determine that they meant "we await trade" with 78% certainty, with the warlike interpretation arising from a cultural metaphor about competition being healthy for commerce. You could be making this up, Theric challenged. Convenient numbers to delay your trials. Adrian smiled tightly. Then test me. Lady Varen. He turned to an elderly noble woman. You're wearing a translation dampener, aren't you? It's causing microfluctuations in the chamber's linguistic field. The woman's eyes widened. How could you possibly? Because I've spent the last 6 hours studying every aspect of Avari technology related to language. Your dampener is outdated, probably black market, designed to prevent certain words from being spoken in your presence. Specifically, Adrian paused, reading the quantum signature. Words related to financial obligations, gambling debts. Perhaps. Lady Varen went pale. Several nobles began checking their own hidden devices. Enough, Lord Theric snarled. Party tricks won't save you from the trials. Human. You may have delayed them, but... Actually, a new voice interrupted. Lord Ketrin, whom Adrian recognized as a moderate faction leader, stood slowly. I move that we allow the consort to attempt the Nexari translation. If he succeeds, it would indeed demonstrate immediate value to the realm. Seconded, another noble called out. Theric looked murderous, but the procedural motion had been made. The vote was close, too close, but it passed by a slim margin. "You have until the Nexari arrive," Theric said coldly. "When you fail, the trials begin immediately, and I will personally oversee them." As the council dispersed, Adrian felt Kalira's hand brush his arm, a subtle gesture of support that sent warmth through him. But the victory felt hollow. He'd bought time, nothing more. Back in his quarters, Adrian threw himself into the Nexari problem with desperate intensity. Arvin brought meals he barely touched. Messages from Mira piled up unread. The binary suns rose and set, marking the passage of precious time. "You're going to burn out," Arvin warned during one of his check-ins. "Even genius needs rest." Genius. Adrian laughed bitterly. "I'm not a genius. I'm just good at seeing patterns. And right now, the pattern I see is Theric preparing to kill me the moment I fail." "You won't fail. How can you be so sure?" Arvin was quiet for a moment. "Because you're the first person in decades to make the nobility nervous. They're checking their translation dampeners, reviewing their legal documents, worried about what else you might expose. Theric's not the only one with secrets." Adrian looked up from his work. "Is that why some voted for me, not out of fairness but fear?" "Fear can be useful," Arvin said pragmatically. "But you need to be careful. Theric's planning something. My sources say he's been meeting with the old guard, even reaching out to off-world contacts." Before Adrian could respond, his door chimed. A palace servant entered, bearing an ornate box. "A gift for the royal consort," the servant announced, "from Lord Theric, in honor of your upcoming trials." Arvin tensed, but Adrian was already scanning the box with every detection device he had. No poisons, no explosives, nothing obviously harmful. Inside was a simple metal disc, inscribed with ancient Avari symbols. "It's a challenge coin," Arvin breathed. "From the old dueling traditions. Theric's formally declaring his intent to face you in the combat trial personally." Adrian picked up the coin, feeling its weight. "Can he do that?" "Any noble can volunteer to test a consort. It's rarely done because it's seen as beneath their dignity to fight someone of lower station. But by sending this..." Arvin's expression was grim. "He's making it personal, public. He intends to kill you himself in front of the entire court." Adrian set the coin aside and returned to his work. Fear was a luxury he couldn't afford. But as he worked, part of his mind began analyzing combat itself as a language moves and countermoves, feints and declarations. If he couldn't match Theric's strength, perhaps he could outthink him. The night before the Nexari arrival, Kalira visited again. This time, she came openly, accompanied by guards. The pretense was reviewing diplomatic protocols, but once they were alone, her careful composure cracked. "I've been researching human combat techniques," she said without preamble. "Your species' military history. You use tools, tactics, deception. But Theric has been training for centuries. He's killed dozens in formal duels." "You're really encouraging," Adrian said dryly, not looking up from his calculations. "I'm being realistic." She moved closer, and Adrian caught that scent again, ozone and flowers. "There might be a way to invoke trial by proxy, to have Arvin fight in your place." "No." Adrian finally met her eyes. "That would undermine everything. The whole point is to prove a human can stand equal to the Avari. Having someone else fight for me defeats that purpose." "Your principles won't matter if you're dead." "Neither will your reforms." Adrian stood, frustrated. "Don't you see this isn't just about me anymore? If I run from this, if I hide behind proxies and loopholes, I'm just confirming what Theric says, that humans are lesser, that we don't belong here." Kalira's eyes flashed. "I didn't save you from execution just to watch you die in the arena." "Then why did you save me?" Adrian demanded. "Really not the political reasons? Not the strategic value? Why me?" For a moment, Kalira's mask slipped entirely. Because when you spoke those words accidental, fumbling, wrong, you looked at me like I was just a person, not a queen, not a symbol, not a political tool, just me. Do you know how long it's been since anyone looked at me that way? The air between them crackled with tension. Adrian felt himself leaning toward her, drawn by something beyond politics or survival. "We can't," Kalira whispered, but she didn't move away. "I know," Adrian said, but his hand found hers anyway. For a heartbeat, they stood frozen, balanced on the edge of something irreversible. Then Kalira pulled back, her walls slamming back into place. "Finish the translation," she said coldly. "Survive tomorrow. Then we'll discuss the combat trial." She left without another word, but Adrian could still feel the ghost of her touch. He threw himself back into the Nexari problem with renewed desperation. He had to succeed not for politics, not for reform, but for the possibility glimpsed in that moment of connection. Dawn came too soon. The Nexari delegation had arrived during the night, their ship a constantly shifting geometric puzzle that hurt to look at directly. Adrian stood in the reception hall, his new translation matrix loaded into a specialized headset that would let him parse their quantum language in real time. The entire court had assembled. Theric stood with his supporters, clearly hoping to witness Adrian's failure. Kalira sat on her throne, regal and distant. Arvin positioned himself where he could watch for threats. The Nexari entered, and Adrian's breath caught. He'd expected something alien, but they were beautiful, in an impossible way. Forms that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Voices that harmonized with themselves across probability spectrums. The lead Nexari spoke, and Adrian's headset exploded with data. His mind raced to process probability clouds, contextual matrices, cultural resonances. For a terrifying moment, it was too much. The patterns wouldn't resolve. Then, like a key turning in a lock, everything clicked. "Honored Queen of Fixed-Form People," Adrian translated, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "We sing, speak will speak of trade exchange growth. Your linear time confuses, delights teaches us. We offered, will offer, partnership, symbiosis, evolution." Gasps echoed through the hall. The Nexari leader's form shifted in what Adrian somehow recognized as pleased surprise. "You here understand, embrace our meaning song," the Nexari responded. "First of fixed form to parse dance, know our truth probability. We are where we'll be impressed, grateful, eager." What followed was the most complex negotiation Adrian had ever witnessed. Each statement existed in multiple states. Each agreement both was and wasn't until observed. But Adrian rode the probability waves, translating not just words, but concepts that had no linear equivalent. 3 hours later, they had a trade agreement that would revolutionize both civilizations. The Nexari departed with what Adrian interpreted as profound satisfaction, promising to return, have returned, will return soon. The council chamber erupted. Nobles who had scorned Adrian now looked at him with new respect and new fear. He had done what their best minds had failed to do for years. "Impressive," Lord Theric said loudly, cutting through the celebration. "The human has earned his delay, but translation is not combat. The trials will proceed as scheduled in 20 days. I look forward to testing your other abilities." Adrian met his gaze steadily. "As do I, Lord Theric, as do I." But even as he spoke, Adrian's mind was already working on the next problem. He'd proven his intellectual worth, but that was the easy part. Now he had to figure out how to survive single combat against a warrior with centuries of experience. The game was evolving, the stakes rising, and Adrian Hale, accidental hero, had no intention of losing. "The user wants me to continue writing part 4 of the story, following the established plot outline. Based on the outline, this part should focus on 1. Adrian discovering the conspiracy and evidence about King Aldrich's death. Development of the new translation device that can detect emotions, deception. Building tension toward the combat trial. Deepening the relationship between Adrian and Kaelira while maintaining the tension. 5. Theric's schemes intensifying. Key points to include Adrian working with Mira, his sister, on the new translation technology, discovering more about how the previous king died. Theric's attempts to sabotage, kill Adrian before the trials. Adrian beginning combat training while using his intellect to prepare. The conspiracy deepening. I need to write 4,000, 5,000 words, continuing directly from Part 3, focusing on character development and building toward the climactic duel. The training hall was a study in controlled violence. Adrian stood at its center, breathing hard, his practice blade trembling in his grip. Across from him, Captain Arvin reset his stance with the patience of someone who had trained countless warriors. "Again," Arvin commanded. "This time, don't telegraph your intentions. Your shoulders tense before every strike." Adrian attacked, trying to keep his movements fluid. Arvin deflected his blade with casual ease, then swept his legs. Adrian hit the crystalline floor for the 10th time that morning. "Better," Arvin said, offering a hand up. "You lasted 3 seconds longer." "At this rate, I'll survive a full minute against Theric," Adrian said bitterly. "You're not going to beat him with swordplay," Arvin said bluntly. "We both know that. But you need to last long enough to implement whatever strategy that clever mind of yours is cooking up." Adrian accepted a water pouch, his muscles screaming. He'd been training for 10 days since the Nexari success, splitting his time between combat practice and his secret project. What if I don't have a strategy? What if I'm just delaying the inevitable? "Then you'll die," Arvin said simply. "But I don't think you're the type to give up. You solved the Nexari language. You'll solve this too." Adrian's communicator chimed. A message from Mira appeared in coded text. "Package arriving tonight. New hardware specs better than projected. Dad would be proud." Their father had been a communications engineer before his death 5 years ago. He would have loved this project, a translator that could pierce through deception itself. Adrian had been working with Mira remotely, using the palace's quantum computers to model the neural linguistic patterns that accompanied lies. "I need to go," Adrian said, grabbing his things. Arvin caught his arm. "Be careful. 3 servants have reported seeing strangers in the palace. Not Avari, not human. Theric's bringing in off-world muscle." Adrian nodded grimly and headed back to his quarters, taking a circuitous route through the palace. He'd learned to vary his patterns after the second assassination attempt, a poisoned stylus that would have killed him if he hadn't noticed the molecular irregularities. His quarters had been transformed into a makeshift laboratory. Holographic displays showed brain scans, linguistic heat maps, probability calculations. At the center sat his modified translator, now enhanced with components salvaged from King Aldrich's prototype. Adrian was deep in code when his door chimed. He checked the security feed, then smiled. Ambassador Mitchell stood outside, looking deeply uncomfortable. "Ambassador," Adrian said, opening the door. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Mitchell entered, her eyes widening at his setup. "Dr. Hale, what is all this?" "Insurance," Adrian said carefully. He still didn't know who to trust in the human delegation. "I see." Mitchell sat uninvited. "Adrian, I need to speak frankly. Earth's government is concerned about your situation. They feel your marriage complicates our diplomatic position. They want me to find a way out," Adrian guessed. "They want you to consider all options. There are legal experts who believe the marriage could be annulled based on the translation error." "It can't," Adrian interrupted. "I've studied Avari law extensively. Any attempt to annul would be seen as an attack on their entire legal system. It would destroy any chance of alliance between our species. Mitchell leaned forward. Adrian, I understand you feel obligated, but you need to think about what's best for humanity. I am, Adrian said firmly. Do you know why the Avari have remained isolated for so long? Why they've rejected every attempt at meaningful alliance? Because they don't trust other species to honor agreements. Their entire culture is built on the sanctity of spoken words. If I break this marriage, I confirm their worst fears about humans. And if you die in these trials, then at least I'll have shown we're willing to honor our commitments, even accidental ones. Mitchell stood. I hope you know what you're doing, Doctor, for all our sakes. After she left, Adrian returned to his work with renewed determination. He was close to a breakthrough. The translator could now detect stress patterns in speech, identifying potential deception with 67% accuracy. Not enough for court evidence, but getting better. His door chimed again. This time, the security feed showed a palace servant with a delivery. Adrian scanned it carefully before accepting a habit that had already saved his life twice. Inside was a small device from Mira, disguised as a personal entertainment unit. Adrian connected it to his system and watched as new algorithms flooded his displays. His sister had outdone herself. These patterns were based on human lie detection research combined with xenolinguistic theory. Adrian was integrating the new code when he noticed something odd in King Aldrich's old files. A hidden partition, encrypted with obsolete protocols. It took him an hour to crack it. What he found made his blood run cold. Video recordings. King Aldrich had been investigating corruption in the noble houses, using early versions of the truth detection technology. The final recording was dated just days before his death. Adrian watched King Aldrich tall, regal, with Kalira's same violet eyes, speaking directly to the camera. If you're seeing this, then my suspicions were correct and I am dead. Lord Theric and his conspirators have been planning a coup for years. They've corrupted the sacred traditions, turned our laws into weapons against progress. The evidence is hidden in the archive of truths, sealed behind linguistic locks only my daughter knows how to open. Trust no one except those who speak without deception. The truth will set Alistra free. The recording ended. Adrian stared at the blank screen, mind racing. Evidence existed that could destroy Theric, but it was locked away. He needed to tell Kalira immediately. Adrian encrypted the recording and headed for the Queen's chambers. The palace was quieter than usual, the halls emptier. His instincts screamed danger, but he pressed on. He was passing through the garden of reflected light when they struck. 3 figures emerged from the shadows. Definitely not Avari. They were Karathi mercenaries, their bio-armor rippling with adaptive camouflage. Expensive. Lethal. Dr. Hale, one said in accented English. Lord Theric sends his regards. Adrian dove aside as energy bolts seared the air where he'd been standing. He rolled behind a crystal formation, his mind calculating angles, distances, options. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and his combat training was laughably inadequate. But he had other advantages. Adrian activated his modified translator and spoke in rapid Karathi. Payment uncertain. Theric history betrayal. Previous contractors eliminated post-completion. The mercenaries paused. Adrian continued, weaving truth and implication. Verification possible. Check Karathi Guild records. 3 teams, all dead within days of payment. It wasn't entirely true, but it was close enough. Theric did have a history of eliminating witnesses. The lead mercenary's bio-armor flickered uncertainty. That moment of hesitation saved Adrian's life. Arvin burst into the garden, his blade singing through the air. The captain moved like liquid death, engaging all 3 mercenaries simultaneously. Run! Arvin shouted. Adrian didn't need to be told twice. He sprinted for the Queen's chambers, uploading the recording to her private server as he ran. Behind him, he heard the clash of combat, energy discharges, Arvin's war cry. He burst into Kalira's study to find her in an emergency council meeting. Lords and ladies turned to stare as Adrian stumbled in, disheveled and breathing hard. "Assassins!" he gasped. "Karathi mercenaries! Arvin's fighting them!" Guards immediately deployed. Kalira rose, her expression glacial. "Lord Theric, you were saying something about proper security protocols." Theric's face was stone. "Your Majesty, I hope you're not implying—" "I'm implying nothing," Kalira cut him off. "Merely noting the coincidence that you were arguing for reduced palace security, just as my consort was attacked." Adrian's communicator buzzed. Arvin's message was terse. 3 down. Minor injuries. Theric covering tracks. Relief flooded through Adrian, but he kept his expression neutral. He had bigger ammunition now. "Your Majesty," Adrian said formally, "I've discovered something relevant to the Council's interests." He displayed King Aldrich's recording for all to see. The room erupted as the dead king accused Theric of treason. Several nobles backed away from Theric as if he were poisonous. "Lies," Theric roared. "Fabrications created by human technology." "Then let's verify it," Adrian said calmly. He held up his modified translator. "This device can detect deception with increasing accuracy. Lord Theric, would you submit to a demonstration?" "I will not be subjected to alien trickery." "Afraid?" Adrian pressed. "If you're innocent, what harm could it do?" The trap was simple but effective. Refusing would seem like an admission of guilt. Accepting risked exposure. Theric's eyes blazed with hatred. "Your human device proves nothing," Theric said. "But I'll demonstrate its worthlessness. Ask your questions." Adrian attached sensors to Theric's temples, making a show of calibrating the device. In truth, he was more nervous than he'd ever been. The technology was still experimental. "State your name," Adrian began. "Lord Theric of the Eastern Reaches." The display showed green truth. "Did you hire Karathi mercenaries?" "No." The display flickered between green and red, settling on amber, possible deception. "Did you conspire against King Aldrich?" "I served my king faithfully." Red, clear deception. The nobles murmured. Theric ripped off the sensors. "This proves nothing. The device is clearly malfunctioning. Human technology cannot judge Avari truth." "Then let others test it," Lord Ketrin suggested. "If it consistently fails, we'll know it's worthless." For the next hour, various nobles submitted to testing. The device wasn't perfect, but it was accurate enough to cause a sensation. Minor lies were exposed, small deceptions revealed. Most importantly, it showed that truth-speaking nobles registered consistently green. "Enough of this circus," Theric declared. "The king's recording could be fake. This device is unproven. I demand trial by combat to settle these accusations once and for all." "Against whom?" Kalira asked dangerously. "Against your human consort. If he defeats me, I'll confess everything. When I defeat him, these lies die with him." Adrian felt the walls closing in. This was Theric's endgame: use the combat trial to eliminate both Adrian and the evidence against him. "Accepted," Adrian said before anyone could object. Kalira's eyes flashed with alarm, but she couldn't publicly contradict her consort. "The combat trial will commence in 10 days, as scheduled. The truth will be revealed, one way or another." As the council dispersed, Adrian felt the weight of what he'd just committed to. 10 days to turn himself from a clumsy academic into someone who could face a centuries-old warrior. That night, Kalira came to his quarters openly, dismissing propriety. "You're going to die," she said without preamble. "Theric has killed 47 opponents in formal duels. You've been training for 10 days. "I have a plan," Adrian said. "Your plan better be extraordinary." Adrian showed her the truth detection technology. What if the combat itself could reveal truth? Every move Theric makes, every strategy he employs, will tell a story. If I can survive long enough to let that story unfold. "You're gambling your life on experimental technology and linguistic theory," Kalira said. "Yes." She was quiet for a long moment. Show me everything. Every file, every recording, every piece of evidence. If you're going to die for this, I need to understand why. They worked through the night, Adrian explaining the connections he'd found, the patterns of corruption, the hidden recordings. Kalira revealed her own investigations, the linguistic locks her father had taught her. The archive of truths, she said finally. I know where it is, but accessing it requires two people speaking in perfect synchronization, a trust exercise my father designed. He said he'd teach my consort when the time came. We could try. No, Kalira said firmly. If Theric killed you before we expose the archive, the evidence would be lost forever. Win the trial first. Then, we'll reveal everything. Adrian noticed she said win, not survive. You believe I can do it, he said, surprised. I believe you're cleverer than Theric expects. He sees a weak human academic. He doesn't see the man who cracked the Nexari language, who exposed Lady Varan's deception, who turned Karathi mercenaries against their employer with words alone. Words won't stop a blade. No, Kalira agreed. But understanding the language of combat might help you redirect one. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. Adrian, these past weeks, watching you navigate our world, seeing you fight for truth despite the danger, I need you to know that regardless of how this began, I'm glad you're here. Before Adrian could respond, she was gone, leaving him with the ghost of her presence and a determination burning brighter than fear. 9 days until the trial. 9 days to become someone capable of facing death and emerging victorious. 9 days to prove that understanding could triumph over force. Adrian returned to his work. But now he was studying combat footage, analyzing Theric's 47 victories, looking for patterns, tells, the linguistic structure of violence itself. Somewhere in that data was the key to survival. He just had to find it before time ran out. The crystal arena of Illustra had never seen such a crowd. Every tier was packed with spectators, Avari nobility, common citizens who'd paid extraordinary sums for tickets, and a small contingent of humans from the diplomatic delegation. The arena floor itself was a marvel of engineering, a perfect circle of programmable crystal that could become as hard as diamond or as yielding as water, depending on the combat requirements. Adrian stood in the preparation chamber, his hands surprisingly steady as Arvin helped him into his combat suit. It was a hybrid design, human engineering reinforced with Avari materials. Lightweight, but offering protection against energy weapons. Not that it would matter much against Theric's strength. Remember, Arvin said, checking the suit systems. Theric favors his right side for killing blows. He has a tell his left shoulder drop slightly before he commits to a lethal strike. You'll have maybe half a second to react. Half a second, Adrian repeated, his mind running through combat scenarios for the 1000th time. In linguistic terms, that's about the time it takes to process the beginning of a phoneme, the start of meaning. Arvin paused. You're thinking about grammar at a time like this. I'm thinking about patterns, Adrian corrected. Everything has patterns. Language, behavior, combat. Theric has won 47 duels. That's 47 data points. I've found his rhythm. Finding it and surviving it are different things, Arvin warned. Adrian, I need you to know if things go badly. I'll try to intervene. Tradition be damned. No, Adrian said firmly. Promise me you won't. This has to be clean, legitimate. Otherwise, everything we've worked for means nothing. Arvin's jaw clenched, but he nodded. You're braver than most warriors I've known. Or more stupid, Adrian said with a weak smile. A chime announced the time. Adrian took a deep breath, activated his modified translator, now configured to read micro-expressions and combat intentions, and walked into the arena. The noise was overwhelming. Thousands of voices created a wall of sound that his translator tried and failed to parse. Adrian forced himself to focus on the center of the arena, where Theric waited. The Lord had dressed for the occasion in traditional combat armor that seemed to absorb light. His blade was a work of art, crystalline edge, monomolecularly sharp. Handle wrapped in leather from some extinct beast. He moved with the casual grace of absolute confidence. "Human," Theric called out. His voice amplified across the arena. "You stand accused of deception, of corrupting our traditions with your alien presence. Do you have any final words before justice is served?" Adrian activated his own amplification. His voice was steady, carrying clearly. "I have only questions, Lord Theric. Why did King Aldrich hesitate during his final duel? What word was spoken that confused him, who benefited from his death?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Theric's expression darkened. "The dead king's failings are not relevant to—" "Everything is relevant," Adrian interrupted. "In Avari law, context shapes meaning. The context of why we're here, in this arena, begins with a king's murder disguised as honor." "Enough!" Theric roared. "Arm yourself, human! Let combat decide truth!" Adrian drew his blade, a simple Avari short sword he'd trained with. Its weight familiar after countless hours of practice. His HUD displayed Theric's biometric data, the translator working overtime to process threat indicators. Queen Kalira stood in the royal box, her face a mask of calm. But Adrian caught the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped the balcony railing. Beside her, various nobles watched with expressions ranging from bloodthirsty anticipation to worried calculation. The ceremonial bell rang. The duel began. Theric moved faster than anything Adrian had faced in training. The Lord's blade whispered through the air, where Adrian's head had been a microsecond before. Only the translator's predictive algorithm had saved him, reading the minute muscle tensions that preceded the strike. Adrian backpedaled, barely deflecting a follow-up thrust. Theric was testing him. Adrian realized, not going for an immediate kill, but assessing his capabilities. "You move like a frightened child," Theric taunted, circling. "Is this the best humanity offers?" Adrian didn't respond. He was too busy processing data. Every step Theric took, every shift of weight, every breath was being analyzed. His modified translator wasn't just reading combat, it was learning it. Theric attacked again, a brutal combination that would have overwhelmed any traditional defender. But Adrian wasn't fighting traditionally. He was translating converting physical movements into linguistic patterns, predicting the next phrase in Theric's violent sentence. Duck, parry, sidestep, roll. Adrian gave ground steadily, circling the arena. The crowd began to jeer. Some called for blood. Others mocked the human's cowardice. But Adrian wasn't listening. He was reading. "Fight back!" someone shouted from the human delegation. Ambassador Mitchell, Adrian noted absently. Interesting that she was so invested in his performance. Theric's attacks grew more aggressive, less testing, and more intent on ending the match. Adrian's HUD flashed warnings as his energy reserves depleted. The combat suit could only compensate for so much of the physical disparity. Then Adrian saw it, the pattern within the pattern. Theric wasn't just fighting, he was performing. Every strike was calculated not just for effectiveness, but for spectacle. The Lord was playing to the crowd, establishing dominance, which meant he was vulnerable to unexpected responses. Adrian suddenly stopped retreating, as Theric's blade descended in what should have been a killing blow. Adrian stepped inside the arc, accepting a glancing cut to his shoulder in exchange for positioning. His free hand slapped against Theric's armor, leaving behind a small device. Theric shoved him away with crushing force. Adrian flew backward, rolling to absorb the impact. Blood seeped through his suit where the blade had scored, but he was smiling. "What did you—" Theric began, then stopped as the device activated. It was the portable truth detector, modified with magnetic adhesion and configured to broadcast. Suddenly, Therek's biometric data was displayed on every screen in the arena: heart rate, stress hormones, neural activity patterns associated with deception. "Let's make this interesting," Adrian said, getting to his feet. "Lord Therek, did you arrange King Aldrich's death?" "This is not a trial," Therek snarled, trying to remove the device. But it was designed to resist tampering, and doing so during combat left him open. Adrian pressed his attack not with his blade, but with words. "Did you conspire with Lord Varen? Did you teach him the archaic word that confused the king?" The biometric displays spiked red. Deception, stress, guilt. The crowd's jeers turned to murmurs of shock. Therek's face contorted with rage. "Meaningless human technology. I'll silence your lies with steel." He charged with berserker fury, abandoning technique for raw power. Adrian barely managed to dodge, his translator screaming warnings. But rage made Therek predictable. The patterns became clearer, simpler. Adrian fought defensively, letting Therek expend energy while continuing his verbal assault. "Why did Lord Varen disappear after the king's death? Did you eliminate him to cover your tracks? Was he another tool you discarded?" Each question was timed with Therek's attacks, disrupting his rhythm. The truth detector continued its damning display. Red, red, red. "Enough." Therek raised his blade for a devastating overhead strike, the same killing blow that had ended a dozen opponents. Time slowed. Adrian's translator highlighted the tail left shoulder dropping, weight shifting for maximum force. Half a second to live or die. Adrian made his choice. Instead of dodging, he stepped forward, raising his own blade at a precise angle. Therek's strike, powered by rage and centuries of muscle memory, met Adrian's positioned defense. The angle was perfect. Therek's own force redirected along the blade, pulling him off balance. Adrian rolled aside as Therek stumbled past. In that moment of vulnerability, Adrian's blade found the weak point in Therek's armor that his analysis had identified: a gap where traditional Avari armor overlapped, designed for flexibility, but vulnerable to precise strikes. The blade sank deep, not a killing blow, but devastating. Therek fell to one knee, purple blood flowing. Adrian stood over him, breathing hard, his own wounds screaming. "Yield," he said. "Tell the truth, and yield." Therek looked up at him with hatred. But also, Adrian saw, with a strange respect. You translated my combat style. Read me like a text." "Everything is language," Adrian said. "Even violence. Now speak the truth. Lord Therek, by the laws of the blood duel, speak the truth." The arena was silent. Thousands held their breath. The biometric display showed Therek's internal struggle, deception warring with the compulsion of defeat. The ancient laws that demanded honesty from the fallen. Therek coughed blood. "I killed Aldrich, taught Varen the word trap, eliminated him after." His voice grew stronger, driven by the imperative of the blood duel. "I've killed dozens to preserve our traditions, to keep power where it belongs. The Queen's reforms would destroy us, make us weak like humans." He turned to the royal box. "But this human, he fought with honor, with intelligence. He earned his victory." Therek's expression twisted with pain and rage. "I yield. May my truth be my legacy." The arena erupted. Guards moved to secure Therek for medical treatment and imprisonment. Nobles scrambled to distance themselves from the fallen lord's faction. The human delegation cheered with relief. But Adrian only had eyes for Kalira. She descended from the royal box, moving through the chaos with regal grace. When she reached him, her composed mask finally cracked. "You magnificent fool," she said softly. "You actually did it." "Pattern recognition," Adrian said weakly. His legs were starting to shake as adrenaline faded. "Just very violent pattern recognition." She caught him as he swayed. "Medics!" she called, but her arms around him were gentle. You're going to be insufferable about this, aren't you? Probably, Adrian admitted. But first, I think I need to not die from blood loss. As medics rushed to tend his wounds, Adrian kept his eyes on Kalira. They had won a crucial battle, but the war for Illustra's future was just beginning. Theric's confession would trigger investigations, trials, a complete upheaval of the power structure. But they would face it together, the alien queen and her accidental human consort, bound by misunderstood words that had become the foundation for something real. The crowd continued to roar, but Adrian heard something else in the noise. The sound of change, of walls crumbling, of two civilizations taking the first real steps toward understanding. All because of a glitch in translation that had become the most important conversation of his life. "The medical bay," Arvin said, appearing at his side. The captain's eyes were suspiciously moist. "Before you bleed on the Queen's royal robes." "Traditional," Adrian slurred as medication took hold. "Binding by blood. Very symbolic." Kalira laughed, a sound like silver bells that cut through his fading consciousness. "Rest now, my clever warrior. Tomorrow, we reshape the world." As darkness claimed him, Adrian held on to that promise. He had survived the impossible, turned combat into conversation, violence into truth. The accidental husband had become something more, a bridge between worlds. A translator, not just of words, but of hopes, fears, and the possibility of connection across the vast gulf of species. The game was far from over, but for the first time, Adrian knew they were playing to win. The medical bay's crystalline walls hummed with healing frequencies as Adrian drifted in and out of consciousness. His wounds had been severe, but not life-threatening. Avari medical technology was remarkably advanced. Through the haze of painkillers, he heard voices arguing nearby. "The conspiracy runs deeper than just Theric," Captain Arvin was saying. "We've arrested 17 nobles so far, but there are more. They're destroying evidence, fleeing off-world." "Let them run." Kalira's voice was steel. "We have Theric's confession, recorded before thousands. The old order is broken. What matters now is what we build to replace it." Adrian forced his eyes open. "The archive," he croaked. "Your father's evidence." Kalira was at his side instantly. "Rest. The archive has waited this long." "No." Adrian struggled to sit up. "Theric's supporters are regrouping. We need that evidence now, before they can counter-narrative his confession as coercion." Dr. Hale, the Avari physician, floated over. "Your human physiology is remarkably resilient, but you need at least another day of treatment." "I need 2 hours," Adrian bargained. "Just long enough to access the archive. Then I'll rest for a week if you want." Kalira studied him. "You can barely stand." "Then you'll have to hold me up," Adrian said. "Partners, remember." Something shifted in her expression. "Very well. Dr. Hale, prepare a mobility frame. We'll be back within 3 hours." The journey to the Archive of Truths took them deep beneath the palace, into sections Adrian had never seen. Ancient Avari script covered the walls, growing older and more complex as they descended. His translator struggled with some of the symbols' languages that had been dead for millennia. "My father brought me here when I was young," Kalira said as they walked. She supported Adrian despite his protests about the mobility frame. "He said the archive was our people's memory, not just of facts, but of intentions, contexts, the why behind our laws." They reached a circular chamber, with no visible entrance. The walls were covered in flowing script that seemed to move like living things. "The lock," Kalira explained. "It requires 2 voices, speaking in perfect synchronization, not just the words, but the emotional resonance, the intent. My father said it was the ultimate test of trust between partners." Adrian studied the script, his linguistic mind already parsing patterns. "It's a poem. No, a promise. About truth and trust and He looked at Kalira. Love. My parents spoke it on their bonding day, Kalira confirmed. The lock reads not just sound, but sincerity. We must mean every word. They positioned themselves before the wall. Kalira began to speak, and Adrian followed, his translator helping him navigate the ancient pronunciation. The words were beautiful, a declaration of partnership that transcended simple romance. I speak with you in one voice, they said together. I see with you in one vision. I stand with you in one truth. Where words divide, let understanding unite. Where silence threatens, let honesty prevail. In trust, in truth, in time eternal we are one. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the wall simply dissolved, revealing a vast chamber filled with crystalline storage matrices. You meant it, Kalira said softly, wonder in her voice. The lock only opens for truth. You truly meant those words. Didn't you? Adrian asked. She didn't answer, but her hand found his as they entered the archive. What they found exceeded Adrian's wildest expectations. Not just evidence of Therek's conspiracy, but records stretching back centuries, a hidden history of corruption, of noble houses using linguistic tricks to maintain power, of reforms attempted and crushed. This is what my father died for, Kalira breathed, accessing a central console. He wasn't just collecting evidence. He was documenting the entire system's failure. Adrian connected his modified translator to the archive systems. We can release this gradually, build public support for reform. But first, he pulled up specific files. Here, financial records showing Therek's faction has been embezzling from the crown for decades. Military deployments that failed because orders were deliberately mistranslated. Trade agreements sabotaged through linguistic loopholes. Enough to discredit the entire conservative faction, Kalira said. But also enough to cause chaos if released carelessly. Then we don't release it carelessly, Adrian said. We use the truth strategically, surgically, dismantle their power structures piece by piece, while building something better. They worked for 2 hours, copying crucial files, planning their approach. Adrian's wounds ached, but he pushed through, driven by the magnitude of what they'd discovered. As they prepared to leave, Kalira paused. Adrian, there's something I need to tell you. About the translation error that started all this. Adrian's heart skipped. What about it? I've been analyzing the malfunction since it happened. The probability of that specific error, Your Majesty becoming my wife, was astronomically low. The code corruption was too precise, too targeted. You think someone did it deliberately? I know someone did. She pulled up a file on her personal device. I did. Adrian stared at her. What? Not the initial error, she clarified quickly. That was real likely Therek's doing, trying to create a diplomatic incident. But when I saw what happened, I could have corrected it immediately. Avari ceremonial law allows for correction of obvious linguistic errors within the first minute. I let that minute pass. Why? Adrian's voice was barely a whisper. Because I was tired of being a symbol, a political tool, a prize for noble houses to fight over. Because when you looked at me with such genuine horror and apology, you were the first person in years to see me as just a person who might be inconvenienced, not a queen to be appeased or conquered. So you condemned me to probable death? I saved you from certain death, Kalira corrected. Therek would have found another reason to have you killed. You were too capable, too close to technology he feared. By accepting the marriage, I gave you protection, status, a chance to prove yourself, and... She hesitated. I gave myself a chance at something real. Adrian processed this revelation, his mind spinning. You've been playing a longer game than anyone realized. We both have, Kalira said. You could have found ways to fail the Nexari translation, to prove yourself incompetent, and be safely dismissed. Instead, you chose to excel, to fight, to risk everything for people who aren't even your species. They're your people, Adrian said simply. That made them worth fighting for. Kalira's expression cracked, revealing raw emotion. This is why the lock opened for us. Not because we spoke pretty words, but because despite all the deception and politics and near-death experiences, what we've built is real. Adrian reached out, touching her face gently. So, what happens now? The conspiracy is exposed. Theric is defeated. The reforms can proceed. Do we continue this marriage of convenience, or— There's nothing convenient about you, Kalira interrupted. You're difficult, stubborn, far too clever for your own good, and you have an alarming tendency to nearly die for principle. But you're also— She took a breath. You're also the partner I never dared hope for. Someone who sees patterns where others see chaos, who builds bridges where others build walls. Is that your way of saying you love me? That's my way of saying I choose you, Kalira said. Not because of ancient laws or political necessity, but because somewhere between a translation error and a blood duel, you became essential to me. Adrian pulled her close, ignoring the protest from his wounds. I love you too, despite the assassination attempts and the deadly trials and the constant political intrigue. Because of them, Kalira corrected, and kissed him. When they finally returned to the medical bay, Dr. Hale was furious about Adrian's extended absence. But the mobility frame's medical sensors showed something interesting. His healing had accelerated during their time in the archive. Stress hormones replaced by endorphins. Remarkable, the doctor muttered. Emotional wellness affecting physical recovery. I'll have to study this. Over the following weeks, Illustra transformed. The evidence from the archive was released strategically. Each revelation timed to prevent chaos while dismantling corrupt power structures. Adrian's truth detection technology was refined and implemented in courts, making linguistic deception nearly impossible. The noble houses adapted or fell. Some embraced the reforms, seeing opportunity in a more open society. Others fled to distant colonies, clinging to their old ways. But the momentum was unstoppable. Adrian split his time between technological development and his duties as consort. He worked with Mira, who had finally visited in person, to perfect the universal translator that could parse not just words, but intentions. The technology began spreading beyond Illustra, revolutionizing communication between species. You realize you've essentially made lying obsolete, Mira said one day, reviewing their latest prototype. That's going to change everything. Not obsolete, Adrian corrected. Just obvious. People can still choose deception, but they can't hide behind language anymore. And you're okay with that, living in a society where every word is transparent. Adrian looked across the lab to where Kalira was discussing implementation with the Council's new reform committee. Transparency isn't the enemy of privacy or poetry, or even necessary social fictions. It's the enemy of using language as a weapon against those who can't decode it. Besides, he smiled, I've learned that truth can be more powerful than any deception. The coronation ceremony came 6 months later. Not a wedding, they were already married by Avari law, but Adrian's formal investiture as prince consort. The title came with real authority, a voice in government, the power to implement change. Ambassador Mitchell attended, leading a full diplomatic delegation. Earth's government wants me to express their cautious optimism about your situation, she said during the reception. You've certainly exceeded everyone's expectations. I had good motivation, Adrian replied, watching Kalira navigate the crowd with grace and purpose. The universal translator technology has already prevented 3 potential conflicts in human space. Mitchell continued, whatever happens here, you've changed the course of history. We've just made it harder for people to misunderstand each other, Adrian said. What they do with that understanding is up to them. Later, as the reception wound down, Adrian found himself on a balcony overlooking the Crystal City. Elistra sparkled in the light of its binary stars, beautiful and alien, and somehow home now. Kalira joined him, leaning against his shoulder. "Regrets?" she asked. "About which part? The accidental marriage? The assassination attempts? The trial by combat? Any of it. All of it. You could have gone home after Tharic's defeat. I would have found a way to release you from the marriage honorably." Adrian turned to face her fully. "Do you know what the translation error actually was? I've analyzed it extensively. The glitch created a phonetic overlap between Your Majesty, informal Avari, and an ancient phrase that means my life's partner. Not wife, exactly. Partner. Equal. Someone who stands beside you." "You never told me that." "I wanted to be sure it was true first," Adrian said. "That we could be partners, not just by accident or necessity, but by choice. Every day we choose this. Every day we build something better than what came before." "Speaking of building," Kalira said with a mysterious smile, "the Council approved your proposal for the Institute of Linguistic Truth. Construction begins next month." Adrian's eyes widened. "Really? They agreed to fund it?" "Enthusiastically. A research center dedicated to developing communication technologies that promote understanding across all species. Even the conservatives couldn't argue against it, especially after you agreed to name it after my father." "The Aldrich Institute," Adrian said softly. He would have loved this, humans and Avari working together, breaking down barriers. "He would have loved you," Kalira said. "A human who fought for Avari ideals better than most Avari. A linguist who turned words into weapons for truth instead of deception." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city lights. In the distance, construction crews worked on expanding the spaceport to accommodate increased traffic from Earth and other systems. The isolation of Elistra was ending, replaced by cautious but genuine engagement with the galactic community. "I should check the overnight reports," Kalira said eventually. "Lord Ketrin thinks he's found another conspiracy cell in the southern provinces, and I should review the Institute's staffing proposals." Adrian added, "Mira sent 47 applications from Earth alone." Neither moved. "Or," Kalira suggested, "we could take one night to just be us. Not the Queen and her human consort, not the reformers or the bridge builders. Just Kalira and Adrian, who found each other through the strangest possible circumstances." "I love you," Adrian said, the words still feeling miraculous after everything they'd been through. "And I love you," Kalira replied, "my accidental, essential, impossible partner." They went inside together, leaving the balcony to the stars. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There were still those who resented change, still systems to reform, still bridges to build between species. But tonight, they were simply two people who had turned a translation error into a transformation, who had found truth in the midst of deception, who had chosen love despite every reason not to. The story that began with a glitch had become something neither could have predicted, a new chapter for two civilizations, written in a language of understanding that transcended words themselves. And this was only the beginning.